Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, this is the first time I appear before you since I was appointed by this Council in May 2008 to this position. And I'm very pleased to have the opportunity for this first interactive dialogue with you. And I also wish to thank you in this opportunity, the previous mandate holder, Milun Kutari, for his work. And I would express my intention and commitment to build upon the foundation he has constructed to this mandate. I would like also to take the opportunity to thank for the Office of High Commission of Human Rights staff support over these first months of work. As you know, I decided to focus my thematic report on the financial crisis and its relation with the right to adequate housing. It's not so much on the impacts of the financial crisis, but its causes and origins, because of this very special link between the financial crisis and the housing markets, and because of that, the right to adequate housing. While political discussions and bailouts to save the financial system are ongoing, I believe it's very important to look at the causes of the crisis in order to avoid repeating the same mistakes in any new national and global agenda. In the report I'm presenting today, I look at the elements that explain the origins of the crisis in the housing markets, and I invite you all to read that. It will be just impossible to explain everything in some minutes, but the report shows how fundamental flaws in current economic and housing policies result in the inability of market and financial mechanisms to provide adequate and affordable housing for all. Moreover, one of these fundamental errors has been to consider housing only as a commodity and as an investment asset. While this Council may clearly see the various human rights aspects of housing, the actual decision makers in this field have taken a wrong path. Considered as a commodity, the provision of housing was left only to the private market. And the belief that markets could regulate the production of housing as the most rational means of resource allocation, as long as credit could be accessible for everybody, and this under a very globally integrated financial system, has led public policies towards increasing states' withdrawal from this field. The result was a significant reduction of national budgets and available funds for housing, as well as other state-funded housing programs, especially for the poor. States has instead privileged their role in promotion of a creation of so-called an enabling environment to attract national as well as international capital and foreign investments for real estate operations. And this role is not a passive one. It's a very active and requires a lot of energy from the states. And it has to be noted that this approach was sometimes recommended to developing countries as well. In the 80s, the work of international financial institutions on restructuring the economies of many developing countries in order to reduce their debt were concomitant with the explosion of slums, attracting not only poor rural migrants, but also millions of city dwellers displaced or impoverished by the impact of these adjustments. The transfer of responsibility for dealing with housing to the private market was also followed by a shared view that home ownership was the only and one option for all. So thus, this form of tenure was put in the center of all the policies. And of course, that provided good results for a part of the population, it has also had negative side effects. State withdrawal from the provision of housing encompass several important consequences, including the reduction of public housing stocks, the rise in prices of housing with a detrimental impact in the most vulnerable sections of the population. In addition, speculation in land and housing, urban renewal, city beautification, and the creation of the so-called world-class cities directly impacts housing affordability in cities. When credit is available in large amounts, a large amount of globalized financial capital seeks investment opportunities, the price of urban land appreciates so that only higher income households can afford to buy. The result is segregated cities in one side, specific areas of the city with everything that you can call a city, but only for few people, for the wealthy, and on the other side, those who cannot afford are just pushed outwards into slums, into inadequate housing, living in areas without basic service or too distant from their sources of livelihood. Even in the context of availability of credit and massive construction of private-owned houses that resulted in the creation of residential-only and class-homogeneous suburbs, depriving city dwellers the enjoyment of city life. It's very important to say that adequate housing is not linked to households' personal investment, and it's not for walls and a roof. Housing is a place in a city with access, with infrastructure, services, with opportunities, economic, educational, and cultural opportunities as well. And discrimination based on economic status and social class was the result of all that policy. And groups particularly vulnerable to discrimination, including women, are the most affected of this situation. So the current crisis has worsened affordability problems for housing and land across the world, not only for the poor, now also for low income as well as for middle class more and more. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand that governments have encouraged the accession of low-income households to home ownership with the idea of enhancing the financial assets of these households and reducing the reliance on government aid. While this option may work to provide better security of tenure to some households, it also led to credits being attributed by the private sector to households that, in normal circumstances, would not be eligible for loans and cannot pay back the price of having a private house, the high price of having a private house. Not only the risk for private companies increased, but low-income households were also made even more vulnerable to economic and financial changes. So in some communities, especially certain communities, were additionally confronted with less favorable conditions for mortgage when one is obtained, aggravating their vulnerability. So these groups were more exposed to unethical private actors' behavior, such as so-called predatory lending. So the financial crisis was triggered by problems in the housing sector, and the biggest bubble in history was foreseen, but little or nothing was done by governments to prevent the crisis. In this context, security of tenure for both owners and lenders has been deeply affected by the crisis. In many cases, foreclosure has meant eviction, the loss of the unique home of a household, often resulting in homelessness. And evictions are synonymous for many of destruction of possession, threat to family stability, livelihoods, and many other outcomes. In this context, I welcome some government decisions, including the recent decision of President Obama to provide relief to households at risk of losing their homes, which is a positive first step. It's not enough, but it's a first step.